So I am a primary school teacher firstly, and being a beekeeper is my hobby and my passion. I have 6 beehives in my parents' backyard. I've always loved bees, but a few years ago I found a swarm of bees on the rooftop at Macquarie Centre and decided to get my own hive, and one hive has now become 6. Well, the bees that you've got here, Andrew, they are European bees, and they're the most common and most popular bee species. Most of the bees in European beehives are females. They're the worker bees. So they're the bees that look after the hive. They collect the nectar and pollen, and they're the bees that you'll see flying around visiting flowers. Worker bees have a stinger. They're the only bee to have a stinger, and they also have 5 eyes. They have 2 big eyes, and they have 3 simple eyes that just allow them to see light and dark.
Are their senses completely different to ours as humans?
I believe they are, yes. They certainly see the world very differently to what we do. They are able to see ultraviolet light. So wow. As a result, they like to go for white and purple flowers. That's their preferred colour because they really stand out from their perspective. They do have really good eyesight, but they also rely on their other senses. When they're in the hive in the dark, it is completely dark. There's barely any light that comes through. So they do have to rely on their other senses, their smell and touch, which they rely on their antennae for. When they're out in the big wide world flying around, they certainly have tunnel vision. When they've got their eye on something, that's where they continue to head, regardless of what's in their way.
He looks like he has 2 sets of wings. Is it just the 1 set, or do they have 2?
They do have 2 sets. They have their primary wings, the big wings, and then they have a smaller set of secondary wings. The bees don't start flying until they're about 3 weeks old. They start flight school of an afternoon out the front of their beehive where they learn to fly in a figure of 8 shape to orient themselves. And as they move out and become a forager, the wings are one of the first parts of their body to become quite tattered and old. So you can always tell a bee who is nearing the end of her life by the state of her wings, which is an interesting fact.
Yeah. I was thinking sometimes, back home in the UK, and I'm not sure, I've not seen one here, we have the big bumblebees, and they often have massive yellow things stuck to their legs. Is that pollen? Do the bees here in Australia do the same thing?
That's right, Andrew. They do. On their rear legs, they have these special hairs that the pollen can stick to. So they load the pollen up. I refer to it as pollen pants. It looks like they're little coloured pants as they fly around, and they load up their legs with pollen and return to the hive with it. It's what they feed the baby bees.
Right, okay, that's my next question. So the whole process when they collect the pollen and they make honey, they're not doing that for us, are they? They're doing it. What's the reason for doing that? The natural reason, I guess.
Collecting the pollen is to feed the baby bees. The bees pack the pollen into the comb inside the hive, and it ferments into a sort of bee bread, which is full of protein for the baby bees.
Right. So we've actually got a model of a hive over here. And would you say this is as accurate as the ones that you have and you use?
It certainly is. Inside the hive, you can see, I'll get my laser out again.
Very good.
There is the frames inside the boxes and that is where the bees will build out the comb with beeswax, and that's where the queen will lay her eggs. They'll put pollen, they put honey, and it's sort of like their pantry and the nursery as well.
Okay.
And this bottom box in my hive is where the queen lays her eggs, and I have a queen excluder. It's like a metal cage that stops her from moving up to the top box, because the top box is purely for honey.
Right. So what would happen if she got out and just left?
If the queen leaves the hive, which does happen for a few reasons, the bees will make another queen. So they'll
make another one? One
they'll
of
make another one. They don't normally make just one. They tend to make several, and they'll choose an egg or a young larvae and feed it purely royal jelly, and that little egg will turn into a queen. The queen then has to go out on a mating flight, and she'll mate with between 12 and 20 drones, and then return to the hive, where she'll live for 2 to 5 years, depending on how well she goes. It's the workers who decide whether the queen lives.
So she has to be a good queen to make.
So they will literally, if they find that she's not doing the job, or she's not, they will literally just depose her and they'll find a new one. That's amazing.
Yeah, it is quite sad, but that's how it is. The hive as a population has to survive and thrive, so they need a good queen who is able to produce plenty of workers to support the hive.
So it is very interesting. Lots of people think the queen is in charge of the hive, but it's actually the workers.
Well, I always thought it was the queen. I always thought she bossed everybody around, and maybe she let out some chemicals that told them all what to do. But that's interesting. I didn't realize that the workers are in control. That's amazing. So complicated. But so when they're all operating at their optimum level, how much honey do they actually make for you? So you've got 6 hives. What would that produce in terms of honey?
In terms of honey, over the course of a whole year, I would get approximately 60 to 100 kilos from each hive of honey.
From each hive?
Yeah, which is an awful lot of honey. That is in optimal conditions.
Yeah, wow. Do you like honey?
I love honey. Absolutely love honey. My family love it as well.
Yeah, wow. And so I guess you sell some of it when you overproduce?
I do, yes. I do sell my honey. It is something that I like to be able to share with other people, as you would know, Andrew.
I have to admit, yes, I have had a jar of your honey. It was delicious. It didn't last very long. So if they do overproduce again, just say the word, So yeah, I tasted it. It was amazing. Wow, that's brilliant. So I guess what we're coming down to is the fact that these bees and the bees that you have and bees all over the world are under threat. What do you see as the main threats, and what's the problem we've got if these bees disappear?
Yeah, so it is a real shame that bees are losing a lot of their main population with fires. The bushfires that we had wiped out huge populations of beehives that were in bushland areas, and as well as a result of the bushfires, they lost a lot of their foraging areas. The gum trees, when they flower, produce vast amounts of pollen and nectar for the bees, and if the bees don't have any sources of food, they starve and the hive will perish. Without bees, we wouldn't have about 70% of the food that we eat.
Wow.
It relies on pollination.
Yeah, and I think I read that somewhere that if the bees disappear, then we've only got a limited amount of time ourselves as humans on the planet. So that was quite a scary thing to read. But then when you realize just how important they are in the food chain, and we should be doing something to sort of to help them. And I guess that's what leads us to the next thing is when we're working with students, and we looked at using 3D modeling, didn't we, to create something for you in the Hive, which was a little bee feeder, which you've got over here, haven't we? So let's just move across to the bee feeder.
That's right. Over here, this amazing bee feeder.
The benefit of the bee feeder is that using it, I'm able to supplement hives who may be struggling because they're a new hive or they have quite a low population, or just that it's a rainy period like we're currently going through at the moment and the bees actually aren't able to leave the hive.
This feeder allows me to directly feed sugar water into the hive. So the sugar water replicates honey and nectar, so the bees are still able to eat
and survive for a few days. A 600 ml bottle tends to last a hive about 3 or 4 days. The little tongues suck up the sugar solution that flows down this main channel.
Yeah, which we're going to have a look at in a second, because you were very kind enough to, when you put it into the actual hive, we can got some video of you look at it. Let's just have a watch that now. So I'm just going to zoom into that and let this play.
Phoebe, all right. Hello, my name is Phoebe and I'm a beekeeper. And you're at an teacher training designed for me this bee feeder. This bee feeder goes directly into the hive and it helps bees by feeding them sugar water solution. When bees are weak or there's not much flowers, the sugar water helps the bees stay alive. And you designed this using some technology and 3D printed it for me. This particular hive is a swarm, so I'm feeding them with some sugar water so that they're able to build some wax ready for their queen to start laying.
Purpose, and I think designing for purpose has to be key for the students. And so, so what we were going to do, and in the coming term, we're going to release this project again, and maybe using something like what we're in frames at the moment is get a global army of people printing stuff out and designing things that are going to help, the nature and the planet, and we look at sustainability and all that sort of stuff. So if ever there's a problem with the bees, then do people call you and you go and collect them?
Yes, if there is a swarm, which is when a hive becomes overcrowded and half the bees leave with the queen and they settle somewhere, I'm often called by people to come and remove them from their property.
Bees in there. So what would your advice be to somebody who has bees in their garden?
Mm-hmm. I think the most important thing if someone was to find a swarm is to remember that the bees are most docile when they're swarming. They gorge themselves on honey before they leave, so they actually can't sting very well when they're gorged full of honey. So you should never be concerned about being stung when you see a swarm. The bees will often sort of settle in a lump, whether it's on a tree or a bush or a shrub, and the best thing to do is leave them alone and contact a local beekeeper. There's a great website for swarm patrols, and if you type in your postcode, local beekeepers will come up who would be more than happy to rescue a swarm. I actually don't use a smoker anymore because it stops the queen from laying for a few days.
Okay.
So I just battle through. My bees are fairly docile, so they only get a bit cranky when we're taking honey. But other than that, they're not too deterred from the smoke. But the smoke just moves the bees away and allows beekeepers to get in without squishing too many bees.
Yeah, I bet you feel terrible if you squish them.
Oh, it's awful.
I was going to ask if you know all their names, but I think that's a daft question. But
all my hives do have a name. So
you have names for them. Okay.
Yeah,
what's your favorite hive?
Carrie. Carrie is my favorite hive. Queen Carrie, she's the most beautiful golden bee, and all of her daughters are so calm and placid.
Really?
Which is lovely.
Phoebe, listen, every time I meet with you and speak with you, it's always a massive pleasure. You're probably the most entertaining person I've met, and I love listening to you, and you're so knowledgeable about the bees. And so thank you so much for coming in. I'm gonna finish it.
Thank you, Andrew.
No, honestly, it's an absolute pleasure having you in here, and I'm going to keep coming back to you, and we're going to talk about other stuff. But I just wanted to finish, and this is one question I wanted to ask you. Have you ever been stung?
I have never been stung.
Wow. That is amazing. So Phoebe, listen, thank you so much for coming in. And you have an Instagram, right? So people can have a look at your Instagram and they can follow you.
That's right. It is __ bee garden.
So 2 underscores and then bee garden.
That's correct.
Perfect. I really hope people follow you because what you do is absolutely amazing. Phoebe, thank you so much. I look forward to catching up with you again soon. And thank you for coming.
Andrew. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye, Andrew. Bye.